talking a lot lately about how we're in the middle of a cultural shift when it comes to gaming and how we review games and what's popular and what isn't. Xbox and PlayStation are on the way out. People are overhyping free to play mobile games. They're invested in garbage like Marvel Rivals and like Elden Ring and Baldur's Gate 3, stuff that's not going to stand the test of time, right? I've been talking about this a little bit. People are moving away from Bethesda, away from, the big titles of yesteryear, and they're moving on to new things. And that is especially true when it comes to Nintendo properties. What was popular 10 years ago isn't necessarily like a big deal now. And what's becoming even more prominent is things that were hated 10 years ago are actually getting a really dedicated following. Followings that, much like Paper Mario before it, are becoming somewhat toxic and reprehensible. 10 years ago, I was a major advocate for Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. I was one of the people to come out and say that this was a great game, that the Wii U was killing it, that that Retro Studios had made this really, really solid platformer that was just as good as the Super Nintendo games. I was very, very adamant about Tropical Freeze's success right from the onset. And at the time, that was an extremely controversial opinion. Those of you who've been around for a while know that Tropical Freeze was laughed at. The VGX that year, that was what we called the Game Awards back then, they showed Tropical Freeze next to No Man's Sky. And the gaming industry decided to rally behind Sean Murray's lie instead of the legitimately great Donkey Kong game. And it was to me, one of the biggest betrayals of video game journalism. And to me, one of the big issues that went unaddressed by Gamergate. That a genuinely good revival of this beloved IP was downplayed and ignored to prop up No Man's Sky. It was no different than what we're seeing today with Astrobot winning Game of the Year. But at the time, Tropical Freeze was just this massively downplayed, ignored thing that people were extremely upset with because it wasn't a mature game targeted towards Western gamers, right? And over the past decade, Tropical Freeze has gotten a reputation for being the best 2D platformer ever made. Now, I don't believe it deserves that reputation. I don't think it really lives up to Super Mario Bros. Wonder in 2023. I think, games like New Super Mario Bros. Were unfairly criticized. I think Tropical Freeze has a lot of competition, even within its own series. There can be no denying that there can be no denying that Tropical Freeze did not reach the same heights that Rare's trilogy did. But it's still a great game in its own right and deserves props and deserves praise and respect. But at the same time, because of Tropical Freeze's reputation as being the best 2D platformer, it has developed this toxic fan base that is very upset at Nintendo for not producing another game in the Donkey Kong Country series. Now, this is the really amazing thing that we've seen develop over the past year or so, that people are beginning to get uppity over Donkey Kong not getting a new DKC. People are beginning to rant and rave and post these insane posts on Twitter. I've seen them make up conspiracy theories like, the Mario mandate has somehow metamorphosized into the Donkey Kong mandate or the Miyamoto mandate. People think Nintendo is secretly trying to kill off the Kremlings, right? They're calling like the Tiki Cat tribe the Toad equivalent of DKC, and what it all amounts to is this weird, bizarre mindset among people that Tropical Freeze is simply this game that is being disrespected by Nintendo. It's this really weird cope and seethe in regards to this specific title, but it really needs to be studied to see what like just how ridiculous all this is, because you can see how these people behave and how ridiculous it is. Like they sit there and try and tell you that like I want a new Donkey Kong Country game with the Kremlings, and it has to be 2D, and it has to be this, and you kind of sit there and look at it, and you're just kind of like, Super Mario Bros. Wonder came out last year. And then they're just like, no, that's not a Donkey Kong game, but it's a 2D platformer that innovates on the 2D. No, but it's not a Donkey Kong game. Don't you see? Like again, Tropical Freeze has such a high reputation that people are unwilling to play other 2D platformers out of this weird misconception that it's any other 2D platformer won't nearly be as good, right? It's very similar to how Super Mario Bros. 3 fans act when it comes to like, the wider Mario series, when it comes to like Super Mario World, when it comes to Super Mario Land games, when it comes to Mario 64, Sunshine, Galaxy, New Super Mario Bros. The list goes on, right? The mindset is because Mario 3 is the best Mario game ever made, that means that everything else is trash and it's not worth playing and it's not even worth considering. And if you like those games, you're a pleb who hasn't played enough Mario 3 to know just what a masterpiece it is. And to me, this is a very unfortunate trend when it comes to Nintendo fans. This idea that whenever a game gets a reputation as being the best in its genre, being the best ever made at what it does, like we saw this with Ocarina for a long time. We saw this with like Pokemon Gen 1 for a long time. We saw this with like Super Metroid for a long time. Like people come out and start condemning the sequels for allegedly not being as good as the previous entry. We saw this with Metroid Fusion, we saw this with Metroid Prime 2, we saw this with like Metroid Prime initially. We saw this with like DKC3 and DK64 and like, Jungle Beat, Donkey Konga, Returns, even Tropical Freeze when it first came out. Like there is this mindset that because these older games are such iconic masterpieces that they cannot be allowed to be replaced by newer entries. So a game doesn't really replace an old Nintendo game until it like just completely demolishes it in some way. Breath of the Wild would be a really good example as to how that happened with Zelda, because the narrative for a long time was that Zelda would never top its older entries, and then Breath of the Wild did that, and now like the entire narrative had to shift and change to accommodate that. People suddenly have to pretend that they liked now I have to say that they liked the Ocarina style games, but Tropical Freeze is it's a really interesting situation. Seeing these games develop and seeing people continue to cope and seethe about what Nintendo is doing and the future of the Donkey Kong IP, because you just know every single time. Well, first of all, the Donkey Kong IP never went anywhere, right? When you really look at what's happened since Tropical Freeze, Donkey Kong's appeared in a number of different properties. He's been a pretty prevalent character in Mario spin-off games. He's been involved like, Smash Bros, Mario Kart, they remade Mario versus Donkey Kong recently. He was in the Mario movie even. So like this mindset that a lot of people have that Nintendo is like hating Donkey Kong, after they made an entire expansion to Nintendo World featuring him, it's just downright disgusting and disrespectful. I really do think that the community really needs to start condemning this kind of behavior, because it really is toxic, and I'm really tired of seeing this happen. As a Metroid fan myself, we spent years watching people like cope and seethe about not getting new Metroid games. After Other M came out, people spurred out so hard about Federation Force. They complained about Metroid's 25th anniversary. They claimed the series was being misrepresented. And what happens? It comes back with Samus Returns in a big way, and nobody cares. Everyone does everything in their power to prop up another Metroid 2 remake instead. And what happens after that? Nintendo demonstrates why you can't hype up fan games over official products when they go ahead and unveil Dread, which is a fantastic game. And to this day, a lot of people don't like admitting that Dread was a fantastic game. And this is because of that behavior, because of that mindset. We've gotten so many great Metroid games over the past several years. The community never addressed the fact that the franchise made a glorious return. All of a sudden, Metroid is the well-supported IP and Donkey Kong isn't, or at least according to the masses. And as a result, we got to get uppity about not getting a new Donkey Kong game. We got to get uppity about not getting a new Advance Wars game. We were getting uppity about F-Zero until we got a new one out of nowhere. It's only a matter of time until Star Fox fans start acting up again. Again, this entitlement really needs to stop. Just play the Nintendo games that do get made. That's really all you have to do. I have a really hard time believing that someone who would like Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze wouldn't be into Super Mario Bros. Wonder. If you try and pretend you wouldn't be, I think you are completely delusional and are lying to us in order to push this idea that somehow Nintendo is refusing to develop games that you are interested in. That is not true, and you really, really need to get over yourselves.